Hello and welcome. How is your mind conditioning going? Brainwashing, cleaning our brains, our thinking brains, but conditioning our minds. Chitta, that is affected by this conditioning of our lives, our karma, our actions of body, speech and mind. And by its gentle conditioning, we can establish those qualities, those that I was speaking of recently, the Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, metta, karuna, compassion, mudita, joy, and equanimity. And it is to that end we practice. In the teachings of the Buddha, we're led on this path, the Noble Eightfold Path, towards the end of suffering in this lifetime, to be free from suffering in this lifetime. And to do that, we need to understand there is suffering. Firstly, accept that, know that, as we all do. Know its cause, the cause of suffering. Greed, hatred, delusion. These defilements that are natural, but can be, with this conditioning, gently eroded and eventually, ultimately, completely eradicated. Thus moving us in a wholesome direction towards liberation and peace. So, continuing with your comments and questions, beginning here, along that theme, as they generally are. I am bad and can't even start Buddhism because of weed. I know dogs bark at you when you have bad karma. What's the simplest way to get good, love my community and animals, brackets, cat died, close brackets, again, and start sitting? Oh, a lot there in a very punchy statement. So, weed is generally what you're referring to as marijuana. So, you say, I am bad. Now, no one is bad, but sometimes we do bad things. And if you're breaking this fifth precept, and smoking weed or marijuana would be considered as taking an intoxicant, which leads to heedlessness, the opposite of mindfulness. This practice is all about establishing mindfulness, mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of this mind that we're conditioning, and mindfulness of all phenomena and experiences, the experience of living, attentiveness, and being careful with what we're doing in all of our actions of body, speech and mind. You've recognized that smoking weed, marijuana, is not good for that conditioning of mind. So that's a positive point, very much in your favor. So you are not bad. You're just doing something that is not perhaps conducive to your practice. But in that sense, if you're keeping the other four precepts, you're not killing, you're not stealing, you're refraining from sexual misconduct, and you're not lying, please pat yourself on the back and congratulate yourself, because there are many people on the earth, on the planet, amongst this humanity we live in, that are not keeping any of those precepts, are, going around killing, stealing, in immoral relationships and lying, that pay no attention to those aspects of good behavior that we as Buddhists and in fact perhaps most other religions with any form of code of conduct, as they most of them do, are adhering to. So, you know, you're doing a good part of the work. Dogs don't necessarily, I think, just bark at people with bad karma. They bark out of fear, they bark out of getting to know, attract people's attention, all manner of reasons. So don't worry too much about that. What's the simplest way to get good? Well, practice sila. So try from now on, make the determination to cut down and eventually stop smoking weed, if you can. And know the reason why you're making that determination. It is in order to maintain mindfulness and not have heedlessness, the opposite of mindfulness, that any form of intoxicants will create. So maybe there's some bad karma going by. I think it's probably birds or some peacocks, more likely. You want to love your community and animals and start sitting. Well, you can start sitting right now. If you're listening to this video, you may be sitting down. Just sit and listen. Close your eyes and try to stay relatively still. Use it as a warm-up to your meditation. That you can begin at any time. If you have a little time, sit for a little time. If you have a long time, sit for a long time. If you have the urge to go and smoke weed or marijuana, then try and see that as just a craving, an urge, not necessarily a need, and sit through it. It is difficult and requires skill and determination mostly, but effort. This is where right effort comes about in the Noble Eightfold Path. So, with regards to the development of those qualities, well, as I've just spoken at the beginning of this talk, with the overall practice of Sila, Samadhi, Panya, you will be conditioning the mind and developing those qualities of metta, karuna, and mudita, and upekkha. Now, metta, if you wish, you can say the lines as people do. You can say, firstly, generating or giving metta, loving kindness to yourself, then to people nearby, then to people further afield. To yourself, to people you like or love, to people you feel indifferently about, and even then extending metta, loving kindness towards those whom are your enemies, aggressors, or people you don't like. Just saying these words in the form of a mantra. It isn't actually radiating anything out, but it is developing that quality in your mind through intention to have loving kindness towards all beings. Sabbe sata sukhi hotu. May all beings be happy and well. That's the way you do it. Just keep practicing in that way. You already have done the work by knowing that smoking weed is not helping your mindfulness, and therefore you've made this comment. So that's really the first step, but in very much the right direction. Can you see your mind, citta, as an object of perception? I think refer to the last video, not the last video, the video called What is Wisdom? Where I spoke all about citta and how it is different to consciousness or the other nama, mental aspects of the five aggregates, the five khandhas. Citta is not perception, is not mental formations, and it is not sense consciousness. It is knowing. So it cannot know itself, but you can know it through its conditioning. So when your citta is developed in metta, in loving kindness, in karuna, in compassion, in mudita, and upekkha, equanimity, you will know through your own actions of body, speech and mind, and reactions and behavioural characteristics, how that citta is developing. So you may be practicing for a long time and see no stages of development obvious to you at all. But that is like looking in the mirror each day and seeing no difference in what you look like at all. But if you look at a photograph of some 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you will see a very marked difference in your appearance immediately. And this is like the practice we are doing when conditioning our minds, when practicing on this Noble Eightfold Path. It is slowly developing those qualities. So whilst you can't see them in the mirror immediately, day to day, if you look back in time and think of a situation similar of what you're experiencing here and now, and ask yourself, how would I have reacted, how would I have behaved then? Say 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago, 3 years ago, or a decade ago. It doesn't matter, whatever the time you've been practicing, go back to the beginning and you will notice quite clearly how different if you've been practicing well, how different your reactions and behavioral characteristics are now to how they were then, back in the past, before you began practicing. In that way you can see the development of citta. But to see the observer or know the observer, you'd only be trying to visualize it through sense consciousness, perception or mental formations, sanya or sankhara. And it is not of this conditioned world. It is just conditioned by it. So therefore it cannot be seen in that sense, but known as it is the knower knowing all experience overall. And your mirrored back reflection of citta is the qualities it's developing. I'm struggling with loneliness for quite some time now, and I constantly feel like I haven't achieved anything. Fighting depression and bad anxiety daily. I'm 41 years old. Okay, so please, I've just spoken at some length about the subject of loneliness in just one talk only on loneliness. There are some positive aspects of loneliness at this time of year, the sort of festive season in the modern world, Christmas and what have you, when many people are getting together in groups of friends or family, and maybe you're not, it can amplify that feeling of being alone. I'm estranged from my family for many years, living far, far away, and unable to speak the local language, so very much alone. But I have nature all around me. I'm surrounded by beautiful birds of all varying descriptions. Now, I'm by no means an orthodontist. Probably I need one of those. What's a bird watcher? I'm not a bird watcher anyway. I give them funny little names. There's this beautiful white bird with very long white tails, which I haven't given it a name yet, but it's got this very graceful way of just floating around. It's almost like a ghost. Very beautiful to see it. There's a few of them, and other coloured birds of a similar nature. And there are these other birds that are little bouncing birds. They don't seem to fly much. They bounce. I call them the bouncing birds that bob about. And yesterday they were bouncing on my roof. Now all of this nature you're surrounded with, even in a city, you have pigeons. Many, many pigeons. People don't like them, but they can be great friends. And there are pigeon fanciers, back in my country they're called, that have very close relationships with pigeons as pets. And you can befriend anything in nature far more wholesomely than we can within our human relationships. So don't feel that loneliness is always a negative thing. You can be alone and enjoy solitude out of choice. I have, and many do. But anyway, watch that video about loneliness and find the positive aspects. As far as you constantly feeling you haven't achieved anything, what's to achieve? You're alive, you're healthy. Try and see achieving as not doing something, getting to a goal, establishing something measurable, But instead, have you achieved or have you been able to refrain from doing any harm? In other words, keeping the 5 precepts. Have you been able to refrain from killing, refrain from stealing, refrain from sexual misconduct, refrain from lying, and refrain from taking intoxicants? Now, if you've even only managed to refrain from one of those 5 precepts, you have done society a huge favour. You've given a wonderful and the most general gift that you can to the rest of humanity. Now, that is achieving something. Gaining wealth, gaining fame, fortune, materialistic possessions is of no consequence or importance whatsoever. I gave all of those up to be a lonely old monk sitting here with nothing. No tangible assets whatsoever, other than these 3 robes, my bowl, a belt, a needle and cotton, a razor and a water filter. They're my 8 items that I possess in the world. You kindly finance and provide this phone for me to talk to you in this fashion on this platform, and I have subsequently acquired a new fan as a result of your kindness and generosity, a new electric fan. But it's so good I can't have it on during my talks because it's a little bit too powerful and blows around a bit too much. So generally speaking, the sound in the background is affected by that. So it's very good for its purpose. After I finish talking, it keeps me just about, it'll do me very well through the hot season that is coming, that's for sure. And I've only yet been able to put it on number 1, and it goes up to number 3 when it's very powerful indeed and almost takes off like one of those micro light gliders that often flies above overhead. Being alone is okay. What is causing the suffering is wanting something other than that. So when we see the benefits in being alone, no arguments. You decide what you want to watch on TV or what entertainment you want. You decide when you want to practice meditation, if you want to, for as long as you like. You can go to sleep when you like, wake up when you like, other than the conditions of what you have outside work or any other aspects of your commitments, duties, responsibilities. You are your own boss, and that is often what people choose. So see that positive side in it. And you're 41 years old, it doesn't matter. I first became alone, single, at about the age of 40, I think. Prior to that, I'd always lived either firstly in my family home until I was about 16. Then I went to live with other people in a shared house. Then I lived in a relationship, and then I was married. I was living with partners, wives, and was always my entire life with other people. Never lived alone until I was about 40. And at first it was a big change and a shock. But I soon, very quickly, adapted to it and found that that was so much better than what I'd become used to over the majority of, well, the whole of my life. So 40 years of existence, it might have been a bit less than that, 30, late 30s, I can't quite remember. But a huge number of years, decades of always being with other people and answerable to other people, or them answerable to me. And the same in a workplace environment, working with other people. Even when you're self-employed, as I was for most of that time, you're dealing with customers and you're dealing with other in business relationships. There's always people around you. And I went from all of that to being just completely alone, with nothing to do other than a little bit of work occasionally, which was again on my own, but just of a manual kind of, a non-thinking, non-socializing kind of work, to just being able to practice and start meditating. That's when it came about. And I found that it was very, very enjoyable by comparison to everything I'd experienced previously. So it can give you a wonderful opportunity. Right. It fascinates me how memorize the chants. What's your secret? Oh, I don't have a secret. I can't memorize the chants or the suttas. I know a few of them, the ones I'm repeating every day, but there are many monks who can repeat them all very fluently. And as monks, we should be able to repeat them in full. Certainly the core sequence, they call it, of suttas, but I'm sad to say I can't really even do that. So I don't have a secret. So thank you for thinking that and saying well done, but I mean, I read them from the chanting book usually, even if I know them, just in case. Sometimes you can, just for no reason, you can chant something 3 or 4 times a day for 10 years, and for some reason you'll get to a line and you just have no idea what the next line is. This just happens. This is just the nature of our thinking brains. It's not infallible. It has these blips. So I try to have the chanting book in front of me. Okay, tipi so and the usual bits I don't, but anything longer than those, any reflections or suttas, then I try to have them nearby so I can see them should I get stuck. Do you get supernatural powers? So do I get supernatural powers? Well, whether I get them, whether you get them, or whether anyone else gets them is largely irrelevant. That is not the practice here. The practice here is to become content, to become happy through realizing the cause of suffering and eradicating the cause of suffering. If as a result of that there's a side effect of some supernatural powers, that is being able to really see into people's minds and understand what they're thinking, and anything from that to levitation or floating around in the sky all day long above a cloud or something like that, is not what we're talking about here, and is discouraged, in fact, because would be a distraction to the practice in itself. It is just phenomena. It is of the khandhas, it is of the thinking mind, it's nama rupa, the thinking brain and the physical body. Any supernatural powers of that nature. The true supernatural power is the 7 powers, the 7 iddhipadas, the factors of enlightenment that I will talk about in some detail soon, maybe coming up. But they are the true powers. But the power of samadhi, being able to have focused attention, mindfulness, energy, and enthusiasm for this practice, the general conditioning of citta in terms of loving kindness and generosity is a power that is far more valuable than anything that you may be thinking of another more coarse and less subtle nature. This is a very long one, but I have highlighted the questions within it. So apologies if I've left out a bit of what you're trying to say, but I can only get so much on the screen. My question relates to desire and suffering. When Buddhism talks about samadhi, enlightenment, nirvana, ultimate truth, and so on, it seems to me that it stimulates a kind of desire in the practitioner who would not want to transcend suffering forever or achieve enlightenment. Does not closing the gap between our current level on consciousness and a state of pure egoless universal consciousness we are told exists necessarily create a kind of desire and therefore suffering? So I don't know anything about anyone ever saying that there is a gap between consciousness and whatever pure egoless universal consciousness is. But certainly there is sense consciousness, as I've spoken about in some detail lately, and that of knowing. And the practice is, yes, to be not looking for some ultimate truth. The truth is there. It's told to us right at the beginning. We're not going searching for the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha points out straight away there's suffering, a cause of suffering, an end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. That is the truth. That's all we need to know. So we're mixing up a few other kind of spiritual activities within this question here. So we are looking for enlightenment, which is freedom from suffering in this lifetime. And yes, there is a desire for that. That desire is okay. We're looking at a desire we refer to in the Pali as chanda, wholesome desire. That is the intent to practice well and attain to freedom from suffering in this lifetime. There is nothing wrong with that. To attain, have the goal, the idea, well, to be striving towards a goal is perhaps the wrong way of putting it. But to know that Nibbana is a state in which where we, the citta, is free from suffering, has severed all ties to samsara, as I discussed in that previous talk, is what we're practicing towards. That is the practice. That enthusiasm for that practice, that determination to keep the precepts, to practice meditation, to develop wholesome mind states and eradicate unwholesome mind states, is supported by right effort, energy in the Noble Eightfold Path, and is chanda, the Pali word, a wholesome desire. Like the desire, wholesome desire to want to give, to offer, to help others, generosity, dana. It is not what is opposed to that, tanha, which is thirst or craving. And that is the desire to satisfy anything to do with really sense consciousness or the five khandhas, trying to satisfy on the very coarse, mundane level, bodily needs, mental stimulation, and not looking for the right, seeing the right answers as to where freedom from suffering comes from, and that is to recognize all of those desires as being fruitless in the fact that you're only trying to ever satisfy insatiable, unsatisfiable wanting, as opposed to dealing with what's needed. You're just adding fuel to the addiction, fuel to the fire of desire by keep feeding that unsatisfied nature of greed within us, which is only natural and is there in those three initial root defilements: greed, hatred, delusion, lobha, dosa, moha. That delusion is what stops us seeing clearly that is what we're doing, and that is tanha. So we have two kinds of desire in Buddhism: tanha, unwholesome; chanda, wholesome. So that's the way you can look at it. So the desire to be free from suffering, as long as it's held correctly, it's not a trying to get the goal of I must do this to get to Nibbana and I'm only a winner if I get there. But to see that generally speaking the overall practice of Sila, Samadhi, Panya is beneficial. It will ultimately end up with you attaining to freedom from suffering in this lifetime, but anything along the way is also better than not following the path. Keeping the precepts is always better than not keeping the precepts. Meditating is better than not meditating. Developing wisdom is better than not developing wisdom. If you disagree with that, that's too okay, but then that is not the path, and that is not going to lead to freedom from suffering in this lifetime. Can this really be done in this way? I've wanted to for a while. I think this was referring to one of the How to Be a Monk videos. And if that's what I've said, yes, it can. And that's what I've done, and that's all I've described as from my own experience. So there's no secrets, no hidden message there. What you see is what you get. Here I am, a monk. I came from England, UK. started out this I started out with this in 2015. So what are we now? Nearly 2025. 10 years ago, I suppose. A bit before that, I started practicing, but I really decided I wanted to take it a bit further, a stage further, back in 2015. And here I am now. So yes, it can really be done that way, this way, whatever way is available and suitable to you. We're all different, and there are many ways of doing it, as I hope I describe in those other talks. But depending on where you are, you can do a little bit of research online, find out your nearest Buddhist monastery, go there and ask them, see how they can help you. They'll point you in the right direction. How do members of the Sangha interact with one another and others whom aren't a part of the Sangha? I'm new to studying Buddhism. I've started with books by Thich Nhat Hanh. Do you recommend any other works? Thanks. Okay, so on books, the suttas, the word of the Buddha is the Sutta Pitaka, and you can begin your reading there with the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses. So if you just Google Sutta Pitaka or Buddhist suttas and Majjhima Nikaya, you can find the commonly heard known discourses on the Buddha. But then the Sutta Nikaya in itself is huge. But a really good place to start is the chanting book, because it has all of the necessary Buddhist reflections, suttas, gathas, paritas, whatever you call them, different forms of chants, which are taken, some of them directly from the Sutta Pitaka, summarized in verse form to give you a quick overview of the teachings of the Buddha. Even the first teachings of the Buddha, the Dhammacakka Sutta, the Four Noble Truths and Noble Eightfold Path. Then the fire sermon, the understanding of desire and how we quell desire. Then the Sutta on Not Self. All of these key and important aspects of the Buddha's teachings are all contained just there in the suttas, in the chanting book. So get the Theravada Buddhist chanting book, and I can send you the link on that if you ask me to. Maybe send me an email if you haven't already got it. And it has usually, if you're English speaking, then it's got the English translations, or you can find in your own language, your mother tongue, a translation that's suitable for you. And you've got everything from the Four Noble Truths, or from basic paying homage to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, to the Paccittiya Samuppada, the 12 links of dependent origination, in there, in a summarized form. So that is all I'd recommend, because anything else I recommend is rather personal. There's so many millions of books on Buddhism you could pick from the shelf. What I've read might not necessarily be suitable for you. So you're beginning again in something different to where I began. So you may have already your own ideas. But what is common throughout all traditions and schools of Buddhism are the core teachings, and they're contained in the Sutta Pitaka. So that's what you should be looking towards reading and understanding and using as your basis for Buddhist practice. Now, how do we, members of the Sangha, interact with one another? Well, Sangha are monks and nuns, ordained Buddhist monks and nuns. Officially is the Sangha, and we don't relate to each other much. We practice what's called noble silence, so we only speak to each other when necessary. As far as speaking to others whom aren't part of the Sangha, we speak as I'm speaking to you now, hopefully, kindly, appropriately, at a good and appropriate time, so timely, truthfully, and from a place of experience. We use those sort of 5 categories which help us understand the third point on the Noble Eightfold Path of right speech. So with right speech is how we converse, speak to others, whether they're of the Sangha or not of the Sangha, all beings, in fact. The cat that's just wandered in, whether you saw or not, I will hopefully speak just as kindly to as I would my teacher. back at my monastery in India, because all beings in that sense are to be treated in that way, with metta, with kindness, loving kindness and compassion. So that's how we interact. There's no real formalities you need to be concerned about, if that's what you were getting at. We're trying to be free from greed, hatred and delusion. Can you speak more of delusion? What does it refer to? So that is correct. We're trying to be free from greed, hatred and delusion would be not knowing that we're trying to be free from greed, hatred and delusion. Can I speak more of it? Yeah, I have on many talks. I'm usually referring to it. There are, again, 2 words in the Pali language we use in Buddhism relating to something like this, and because there are 2 words, they have very completely different meanings. They don't usually sort of have this grey area that we have in the English language. Avijja is ignorance, that is not knowing. Delusion is really not understanding. So you could have all of the technical information, you could have read all those books I just mentioned and know them back to front off by heart. Recite them in your own language, Pali, Sanskrit, any language you like. It's still not understand how to put those teachings into practice. That is delusion. That is knowing that there's suffering, a cause of suffering, path leading to the end of suffering, etc., without actually doing anything about it. Just saying, why am I suffering? That is delusion. Actually, it's a good question because it's leading you to find the cause of suffering. But if you are not led towards finding the cause of suffering, and then you see that the cause of suffering is coming from greed and hatred and delusion, then you are deluded. It is delusion. So that's what it's referring to there. So it's, to sum up, it means not understanding. Avijja is ignorance. Delusion, or moha in the Pali language, is lack of understanding, unable to put it into the knowledge you have into use. So you have many people with all sorts of intellectual knowledge in their thinking brains, but really, as we say in the Western modern world, no common sense, you know. They can talk about it, but can't actually do it. It's like reading an instruction book without actually doing using the item that the instructions are for. It is not putting to good use the knowledge you have. So this is delusion. What do you do for the winter? How do you dress? So this is the winter here, this is the cold season. Are you able to use fires or heat? And even in this cold season, I need this fan most of the time, even at night, because it's the cold season and it's about 34 degrees. But say I was going to visit someone in the UK or go to a cold place, which is what you mean, isn't it? Then we still only have these 3 robes, but the outer robe, which is over there, it's called a sangati, is the same as this upper robe. This upper robe, what's it called? The Uchasanga, I think, is just very thin muslin. Yes, because it's so hot here, and it's all wrapped around you, so it needs to be as thin as possible. The lower robe is a little bit thicker, but it's as thin as it can be. No idea what the name of that is, forgotten in Pali. It's just skirt, really, like a sabong, a skirt. But the upper robe, the sangati, is same as this, but double thickness. And a combination of all 3 wrapped around you is usually sufficient. But you'll see monks in the West who are there all the time, they'll have fleeces on and t-shirts underneath this and all sorts. I mean, I can't really speak from any experience of being in the West for any length of time to know how necessary that is. But I have lived in places in India and like Nepal for quite some time, been there where it's been very cold by comparison to here, and really needed to wrap that sangati around me at night time, for instance. So that is sufficient. That is the clothing the Buddha allowed us to have. But there are adaptations for monks in colder countries, I suppose, in this modern day. But for me, I've not had to resort to anything like that. So this is my both winter, spring, summer, autumn outfit, whatever the weather. This is the way it is. It's just how you wear it differently. At the moment, I've got it over one shoulder. We can have it over both shoulders and both arms, covering our full body, neck to ankles, or we can have it just very loosely, so it's covering next to nothing, just very loosely over one shoulder. And then it's a lot cooler, as I wear it sometimes on here. Now, we are not supposed to warm ourselves directly in front of a fire. This is a Vinaya rule. And we're not allowed to light big bonfires because we might be killing all sorts of animals that have gone in there overnight or are attracted to it when you're setting it, for instance. That's part of our Vinaya rules. But there's no rules about whatever heating is in place in the environment where we're staying. There's no such thing here. It's not necessary. So, but are you able to use fires? Technically, no. Now, I do have a little incinerator kind of thing. It's just an empty tin can, really, with some holes in it, that I use to burn off some of the material waste from my mealtime, rather than it going into wherever it would go. I'm not sure where it would go here. So not knowing where it's going to end up, I'd rather, it's not going to disappear quickly, put it that way. Bits of, careful what I say here, because if I dispose of plastic in the wrong way, it could be wrong. If I burn it, it's wrong. But the safest way to get rid of it, so it's not going to do any harm, is to put it safely in a little incinerator where there are no animals and pop the 2 or 3 little packets that may have been wrapping around some food, which are supposed to be biodegradable, but I question how quickly that would be. And I just burn them off quickly in that little fire. It also helps with a little smoke to cleanse the air, and also any garments I have hanging nearby. It helps kind of disinfect them. So for that purpose I use, it's almost for medical purposes if you like, I use a little fire, but it's up off the ground and I shake it so any ants or anything like that, and I only set it right before I light it. So in that sense I hope I'm not breaking any Vinaya rules. But technically we should have someone helping us with such things if it's available. One has to be practical, and in all of the Vinaya rules there is the exception always given by the Buddha out of compassion for except in ill health or sickness. So if you were to need to cook some form of medicine, for instance, that was necessary for your well-being, then perhaps you would be allowed even to break the rule of not being able to cook and cook that medicine up for medicinal purposes. But I unfortunately never had to be in that situation. And I think on that note I should leave it for now and hope there's something useful there. Rosie's rejoined me. She's been absent for the most of the night and the morning, so no doubt she's expecting some meal, whether it's breakfast or lunch, I'm not sure, but I will gladly give her something to eat now. And she's very grateful to you for having helped support us in that respect, because I do get her a little bit of cat food, because it's got all sorts of it's dry stuff, but it's got all sorts of minerals and goodness, vitamins and things in there that she might not ordinarily get, because the food supplies aren't in abundance here. So it might discourage her from killing as well, mice and other things, if she gets her minerals from wherever it comes in the packet form that I get it for her. And the other kittens too. So there we go. Thank you for watching. As I say always, if it's useful, use it. If not, let it go and don't let it bother you. But please come back and listen again. Until next time, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.